stoked. Got a test in less than a week. Hopefully your studies are going well. One person gave me the thumbs up. We'll assume that everybody else is doing well also. Super psyched. Exam 2. Your last Dr. Bobek exam. From here it'll be Dr. Messina, and it'll be more about anatomy and human evolution, things like that. So, today we're talking about the nervous system, just kind of the last stuff from Friday, since we didn't have class Monday. And then, obviously, sensation from today. A couple of memes for you to enjoy. I get a kick out of this one. I thought we had something. You met my family, made me dinner, called me honey. Now suddenly you're a waitress who was doing her job. The biology fact for today has to do kind of with what we learned in class. There's something called a cochlear implant because most of the time deafness occurs in the inner ear, right? Something has gone wrong with your ossicles, those little bones, or with your eardrum or something like that, right? Usually that can just be fixed with a hearing aid. But if you have actual issues with your cochlea, hearing aids just make sounds louder. But if your cochlea doesn't work, it doesn't matter how loud it gets, it's not going to do anything, right? Your cochlea doesn't work. So they implant an electronic device kind of like right behind your ear. And then, so this is like under the skin, right? And then it connects. If you've ever seen someone with a cochlear implant, Dr. Ensign has one. In the movie, what's that movie? I blanked on the title right now, where there's aliens and they're super hearing with John Krasinski and Emily Blunt. Quiet Place. The deaf girl, she has a cochlear implant, right? Her cochlea doesn't work. So it doesn't matter how loud the noises are, she can't hear them. This implant then picks up the sounds and transmits them electronically to the brain. So a hearing aid just makes it louder. A cochlear implant essentially just takes over for your ear and electronically transmits signals straight to your brain. So anyway, I thought that was kind of cool. Study tip, do not cram. Okay? Test is in a week. That's more than enough time. Even if you haven't actually started studying yet, that's more than enough time to get started, right? Because you have, is it just 2 days? Is it Tuesday, Wednesday, or is it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Just Tuesday, Wednesday. So you have 7 days, right? That is more than enough time if you start now and if you have a plan, right? You can't just be like, well, we'll see how it goes. You know what I mean? You have to start some kind of a study plan, start it today. Don't wait until right after my super session on Monday to go, all right, time to start, right? Max, that gives you like a day and a half. And I know it doesn't come as a surprise that cramming isn't good, but it's a friendly reminder. Test is in a week, get on it now, okay? There's gonna be a lot of really complicated stuff. So, we're gonna get started. Before we do you guys have questions on any exam 2 material that you want to talk about? Today's slides are just on the last bit of the brain and then sensation. So if there's something that's not in there that you want to talk about, raise your hand. Gonna assume that's a no then. Guys. So, the cellular basis of learning and memory, right? Because we understand a lot about learning and memory, from a psychological standpoint of just, punishment and reward, adaptation. There's so many things, and if you've ever taken like a Psych 1010 or even like AP Psych in high school, all those kinds of classes talk about learning and memory, right? But what's the actual physical process that allows memory? Does your brain doesn't get any bigger, right? Brains don't really grow once they've hit mature. And in fact, brain size and weight has nothing to do with intelligence. Albert Einstein's brain was actually slightly below average in weight. Weight has nothing to do with it. So if our brain doesn't get bigger, how do we increase our memory? Hint, hint, it's on the screen. Long-term potentiation. What does that mean?
Creating more receptors.
Okay, perfect. So it's creating more receptors. So what we're seeing here is this is before repeated stimulation, right? So maybe this is the first time you learned about long-term potentiation, okay? And your brain hears the word long-term potentiation and sends a signal. Hey, I learned a new word. And it sends out some neurotransmitter saying, hey, we learned a new word, right? This is obviously very kind of abstract and a little oversimplified, but it works, right? Then this long-term potentiation is after you hear long-term potentiation over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And if you aren't cramming, it's, today you studied long-term potentiation. Tomorrow you studied long-term potentiation, right? Then notice how there's more receptors. The more you do something or hear something or learn something or whatever, the more receptors that your brain has in relation to that. Now obviously it's a little oversimplified to just say, yeah, now we have more receptors in our brain for the word long-term potentiation. That's not exactly how it works, but the concept is more repetition, more neurotransmitters, more receptors, more memory, right? So how does it actually do that? Not rhetorical.
Glutamate binds with the NMDA and NMDA receptor in the magnesium leads, which allows the vitamin to come in, and then the other way. It stimulates the AMPA, and then sodium can come into the
So essentially, you're right on. Glutamate is the neurotransmitter that helps with memory, right? You guys remember that? There was GABA, there was glutamate, there was acetylcholine, there was epinephrine. Those were the four we talked about, right? What's GABA for? Relaxation. Acetylcholine? Muscles. Epinephrine? Fight or flight type reactions, right? It's adrenaline. So glutamate is for memory. Now we actually get to see why. So glutamate gets released into the synapse, right? It reacts with an NMDA receptor. That NMDA receptor then allows calcium and sodium into the neuron, right? That calcium and sodium then allows an AMPA receptor to implant in the membrane of the neuron. So we get an AMPA receptor in the membrane, and it then allows more calcium and sodium in, and the calcium and sodium puts on another and another and another and another, right? This is a big factor behind muscle memory, right? We mentioned that, I think, on last week, Wednesday. The more you do something, the easier it gets, right? Have you guys ever noticed you probably type like 50-ish words per minute, right? And you have to backspace a lot, and you're just kind of struggling along, you're doing okay, but the more you type, the more fluid it gets, right? And then if you go for a long time without typing, then you're like struggling again. Or you type your password that you type like 400 times a day, and you can type like 4,000 words a minute, but then you have to type like a regular sentence, and you're like, right? It's muscle memory. You've typed that password so many times, you have so many receptors that remember exactly how to do that. you can do it that much faster, right? So psychology says repetition ingrains that in your memory. Biology says it's the receptors. They're not disagreeing with each other. It's just two different ways of looking at it, right? So usually you just hear doing it over and over again, you get better at it, right? But the reasoning is long-term potentiation.
So what exactly do the AMPA receptors let in? Is it only calcium?
I think it's just calcium and sodium from my understanding. And that really is just to allow even more calcium and sodium in, which leads to more and faster depolarization. So that just means you can do it faster and easier because you can depolarize faster and easier. Does that make sense?
So the glutamate binds to the NMDA, right?
Yes.
And so then what happens between the NMDA and the AMPA?
The NMDA also it pretty much just lets calcium and sodium in, and that triggers an AMPA, which then also just lets calcium and sodium in. So
what's the magnesium 2+?
the magnesium is what blocks the channel. So in both cases, on an open and closed NMDA receptor, there's magnesium, right? But see how this one is actually physically closed and this one's open? The glutamate tells the magnesium to leave, right? And then everything can get through. So glutamate is the key, magnesium is the lock. Glutamate opens the lock, and then sodium and calcium come in. And then they just bring in more AMPA receptors, and then AMPA receptors bring in more AMPA receptors and more AMPA receptors. And the more you use that neuron, the more quickly things fire. So the best example I always think of when this comes is muscle memory. The more you do it, the easier it gets, right? But it works for studying too, right? The more you review something, the more quickly you retrieve that information and the more fully you retrieve that information, right? Okay. You guys need to know this very well. At least when I took the class, I remember like 4 or 5 test questions related to long-term potentiation. It's just, it's so important in learning. It's literally the definition of learning as far as biology. It's key, right? And there are quite a few things you can ask about it, as simple as, you know, which ions are being transferred into the postsynaptic neuron, which receptor first binds with glutamate, which receptor brings in the other, how is long-term potentiation related to learning and memory. There's a treasure trove of questions on just this one topic, so I would expect several. That being said, do you guys feel good with long-term potentiation? Do you have questions? Are you confused on anything? Yeah.
So what effect do the calcium and the sodium have? Like, are they just traveling down their concentration gradient? Is that all this is in the postsynaptic neuron?
They're aiding with, in the end goal is increased depolarization. So more action potentials, faster action potentials, and just that makes it easier to do things. So again, muscle memory, the more you do something, the easier it gets. It's because you have more AMPA receptors, you let in more sodium and calcium, you depolarize and get action potentials more often, more quickly. So you can type your password in half a second because you've done that a bajillion times, but then you have to sit and type an essay and you have to come up with hopefully original ideas, because the university has a very good algorithm for finding out if you're cheating or not. And it takes longer, right? You have to sit there and think, you have to make sure you're hitting the right keys, you have to backspace a lot, right? So it's all just more receptors, more action potentials, faster reactions and actions. Make sense? Other questions?
Is there a certain area of the brain that this happens mainly in?
I would venture the guess that no. I think this is just a generalized reaction because maybe like the area of your brain for motor function, the more you do a physical action, then it happens in the motor. But the more maybe you like puzzles, right? But you have to see to do that. The more puzzles you do, the better your occipital lobe gets. So it should be, I don't know of a specific area. This is pretty much just throughout the brain. Others? Okay, hopefully you're understanding it. If not, you can always email me or Hillary or Dr. Bobek or go to Hillary's session tomorrow, my super session, or so Hillary's tomorrow is a super session as well, so that's definitely one worth going to, and then mine on Monday. Okay, this is a term to be familiar with. Anybody know what plasticity means?
The ability to change.
Yeah, the ability to be molded, to react, to you know how they say kids are bouncy, right? Because kids can like fall off a 3-story building and get up and walk away. That's actually because their bodies are plastic, not literally, but you know, this kind of plastic. Their bones are literally springier, and their joints and their tendons and their ligaments and all that are springier, right? So you can push a kid over and he just hops up, nothing happened. You push me over and it hurts for like 3 days, right? I went sledding forever ago, and I went off a jump and like landed on my side. And it wasn't a big deal. I was like, oh, you know, it didn't really hurt that bad. I couldn't sleep all night because like my whole right side of my body was just like, and I'm like, I'm 23. What the heck? Anyway, so plasticity is the ability to just recuperate or adapt, be molded, right? Like plastic. So neurons are plastic, okay? What does that mean? They're obviously not made of plastic. Okay, it can be changed, okay. Let's develop that a little further.
The more it's used, it creates a faster pathway or a different pathway.
Yeah. So this neuron is sending a signal to this neuron, right? It does it once. Great. Does it another time. Great. It does it more and more and more and more. And the first neuron starts to develop more axon terminals and therefore more synapses onto that neuron, right? It's almost like a muscle, right? The more you use a muscle, the stronger it gets. The more you use certain neurons, the stronger they get in the sense of they have more terminals to the responding neuron. So they can fire more often and more quickly, right? So this is also part of things like muscle memory, right? The more you, I don't know, do bicep curls, right? The easier, the less you even have to think about it, right? The first time you did bicep curls, maybe you had to like really kind of think about it and time it, especially if you did like 2 arms at the same time. You're trying to like not get out of sync or whatever. But after you've done bicep curls for a long time, you just go, right? Or if you're a runner, right? The first time you ever ran in your life, I bet you tripped. I did, right? And I still do. I'm a terrible runner. But people who are very good runners, if you ever watch Usain Bolt, like it doesn't even look like he's trying, right? He's just going, and his legs are in perfect sync, and everything's just going, right? He's got more terminals for that response. Or tennis players, right? You have to be pretty dang good to get every single one of those serves and returns and backhands, right? If you've ever played tennis, it's really not that easy. Or baseball or any sport, right? The more you do it, the more terminals you get for that action, the better you get at it. Make sense? So this isn't the same thing as long-term potentiation, but it's the same idea, if that makes sense. It's just 2 different ways that your brain learns and gets better at things. Okay? Cool beans? Okay. Now, on to sensation. We have several classes of sensory receptors. I just copied this slide straight from Dr. Bobek because there was so much going on in them, but I felt like it was all worth looking at, so I was like, I'm not going to take the time to go through and try and like pick it all out, and so I just stole it. So credit to Dr. Bobek. First off, mechanoreceptors. These have the most functions, right, as you can tell. Pressure, vibration, gravity, acceleration, sound, touch, pressure, auditory. Oh, it already says pressure. Oh, I think it's saying pressure, vibration, gravity, acceleration, sound are interpreted by touch, pressure, auditory, and vestibular receptors, right? So pressure meaning, touch, vibration meaning literally like vibration, right? If you've ever listened to a song with like a lot of bass and you feel like you can like feel it in your bones, that's the vibration receptors. Gravity, you probably don't think about it, but your body has to know which way gravity is going. Otherwise, you wouldn't know which way's up and which way's down. So if you've ever heard of scuba divers getting lost underwater, you guys heard about this? If you were to like, especially it happens with like cave divers, if you dive into a cave, there's no like up or down to an underwater cave, right? They're usually pretty circular, and you don't have a very strong gravitational force underwater because of the buoyancy, and cave divers will literally get like turned upside down. They can't tell which way's up and which way's down because their gravitational receptors just can't decide. There's no up or down underwater, right? Not literally, but acceleration, right? So when somebody is a little bit too insane in their car and they just floor it and your body goes like this and you feel like, oh, that's it, right? It's also partly your organs are shifting. So, and then vestibular receptors, what do you guys think that is? Your ear, right? That's kind of a combination of sound and vibration, since sound is vibration, and we'll actually get into the details on that because it's a little complex. But you may not think that sound is a mechanical energy, but it is, right? You can break stuff with sound, right? I was actually just watching an eye surgeon in surgery, and he was doing cataract surgery, right? Taking cataracts out. And he puts an ultrasound pan into their eye, and it shoots ultrasound waves, and it breaks up the protein that built up on the lens, and then sucks it out, right? So sound is a physical force. It is mechanical energy, and our body can detect it. So, thermoreceptors, thermo meaning heat, very straightforward. We can tell whether we're hot or cold. Straight up. Nociceptors are a little bit different. They're response to noxious stimuli. That's why they're called nociceptors. Now, noxious, usually you think of smells, right? Being like, oh, it's like a noxious smell. It really means pain, right? So you get punched in the face. The nociceptors go, that really hurt. You get a cut. You have an ulcer. You break a bone. It hurts. Why do we want that? That seems really dumb. Especially right after you like hurt yourself and you're like, I wish I could just turn the pain off. I know I hurt myself, right? What's the point? So you don't do it again, definitely. Part of that learning, right?
So you don't hurt yourself further, too.
Yeah. There's a condition, and I can't think of it off the top of my head right now, but there are people who can't feel pain, right? They usually don't live past like 8 years old, because if anything bad happens to them, they don't know, right? Their appendix could rupture, and they are just chilling. It doesn't hurt. They don't feel anything. 2 days later, they don't wake up because their body doesn't tell them, hey, your appendix ruptured. They can't feel it. They break their arm, they don't even know. Maybe if it's like dangling, but they can't feel it, right? They have a stroke, they can't feel it. They have no idea. Well, most of the time you can't feel a stroke anyway, but they have a heart attack. That's a much better example. They can't feel it. That chest pain that you would usually get, and like the numbness in your left side and things like that, they don't feel it. So they don't go to a hospital. and they don't get treated, right? So pain is actually very key to survival. Almost no one with this condition lives even into like double digits. It's very dangerous. Okay, questions here? Yeah.
So where do you like, I don't know, I'm just curious about that condition. Where do you draw that line? Because if you can they feel anything, like if you touch them, they feel that, but if you push hard enough, it becomes pain. You know what I mean? So what's like defined as pain?
You know, I don't know all the fine details. I want to say they can't feel pressure either, from my understanding. They don't have pressure receptors or pain receptors, because it does become a fine line. If I go like that, you just feel it, but if I do it really hard, then it hurts, right? I think they just don't have either. But you may have to Google it and see where they actually define it, but that is a good question. I'd never thought of that. Yeah.
Noxious stimuli is just pain.
Yes. Same thing, right? So it's not smell, right? Somebody farts, your pain receptors don't go, that's a fart. Your smell receptors say that's a fart. Somebody punches you in the nose, your pain receptors fire, right? So it is hard to make the distinction because usually we think of noxious as scent, but it's pain. Although there have been some that I've been like, this hurts. So we all know what I'm talking about. All right, chemoreceptors. This is where farts are. This is for taste, smell, osmoreception, and carotid body receptors. So taste, pretty straightforward. You eat something, you taste it. Oh, but that is an important distinction. Spiciness is not a taste. It's a pain sensation. So you can't taste spicy, you feel it, right? And if anybody's ever eaten anything hotter than like a jalapeno, you know what I'm talking about. Like it hurts, your throat starts to close up, your eyes water, your face starts to get hot, and your tongue like hurts, right? Because spicy is a pain, not a taste. The four tastes are sweet, oh shoot, now I'm on the spot. It's sweet, salty, bitter, and umami, which is like meaty, savory tastes. Those are the four tastes you can taste. Anything else is a combination therein. And then spicy is pain. Anyway, so taste is taste, smell is smell. What's an osmoreceptor? Exactly. So osmosis is, the movement of molecules in water. Well, it's the movement of water in solution. We have to know if our blood pH is too high or too low, right? Usually you don't consciously go, is my blood pH high today? You don't have to think about it, but you have receptors that do it, okay? So that is a chemoreceptor because you're detecting the chemical balance in an area of the body. Carotid body receptors, anybody remember or know? Don't feel bad, I had to Google this one. I was like, I don't know what that is. I know what the carotid is, but. So anybody know what the carotid artery is?
On your leg. The one that runs down your leg.
It's right here. It's the one that you can like feel your pulse on, right? And it branches and goes around like this. Right at that branch, you have carotid body receptors, which are essentially osmoreceptors, but specifically for blood oxygen. And so this is what tells your brain, hey, I don't have enough oxygen. So if you start to feel like short of breath, right, and you start going, it's your carotid body receptor saying, we don't have enough oxygen in the blood. Then your brain says, then let's breathe really fast, right? Or if you actually get oversaturated in oxygen, your body will also try and slow down your breathing. That's a lot rarer to like have too much oxygen. Plus usually you can't do anything about it. You can like slow your breathing for a little bit, but I mean, what are you supposed to do? Just stop breathing? Then you have the same problem. So usually you just die if you have too much oxygen. So carotid body receptors are essentially a special form of osmoreceptor, specifically for blood oxygen right at the carotid branch. Okay? All right. Then electromagnetic receptors are for vision and electromagnetic fields. That's basically light, right? Light is electromagnetic radiation, so electromagnetic receptors detect light. And we'll get into eyes, I think on Friday, which I'm actually super stoked about because that's like what I want to do. So ironically, it's also what I had the hardest time with on, I think it ended up on exam 2. I don't know how it'll break up this year. I think it'll be on exam 2. But pay attention when eyes come up because it's actually very, very complicated. If you didn't know, eyes are pretty complex, pretty difficult. But they use electromagnetic receptors to pick up light, translate it into an understandable signal for our brain. Okay, that's it for sensory receptors. Questions up to there? Okay, we're doing good on time. We got plenty of time. All right. So, how do we decide how much of a signal something should give, right? Did it hurt a little? Did it hurt a lot? Does it smell a little bit bad? Does it smell awful? Is it bright or is it super bright? Is it dim? Is it, So how do we decide intensity of things? Is intensity coding, right? 2 kinds are up there, frequency and population. So frequency is just how hard something gets pressed, right? You don't press very hard, you don't get very many action potentials. See how they're spaced out like that? You press really hard, you get a lot of them. See how they're all the same height, so you're not getting stronger action potentials. Why not? Yeah, action potentials always fire to the same, I can't think of the term, pitch. They always hit the same height, right? So it doesn't matter. As soon as it's past threshold, it's going to spike the exact same amount. So instead of trying to spike harder, it spikes faster, right? More action potentials tell us more pain, more brightness, whatever, right? Or you can have population coding where instead of how hard does it press on a receptor, it's how many receptors does it trigger, right? So you press on your hand really hard and you get kind of both, right? Each receptor says that's a lot of pressure, but then the group of receptors say that pressure is affecting multiple sensors, right? So a harder press, more action potentials per time, and then a longer or a bigger or just whatever sets off more sensors, more action potentials, right? So usually you get both, right? You get a hard press that affects a lot of neurons, or you get a small press that doesn't affect a lot of sensors, right? But that's how your brain decides what's going on. And it doesn't obviously work just for touch. It works for all senses. The faster you're accelerating, the more your body kind of feels it because it affects more sensors and it affects them more harder. I don't know what the word for that would be, but it has more of an effect on each individual receptor and a lot of them. Okay? All right. Questions? That one's not massively complex, but it is important that you understand the distinction. Because honestly, you could get a test question as simple as, what's the difference between frequency and population coding? Frequency is how hard a receptor is triggered. Population is how many receptors are triggered. Boom. Okay? Adaptation. What the heck is that? First off, not even necessarily relating to this, what is just the dictionary definition of adaptation? Getting used to something, adjusting to something, A lot of times you see it in like evolution, right? We adapt to our environment. We get more fit for that environment, right? You can grow more fur or longer beak or whatever, right? Adaptation. So what does adaptation have to do with sensation? Get used to the sensation, right? Where's your tongue right now? Probably like down here against your teeth a little bit. But you weren't paying attention to that until I said something, right? How fast are you breathing? You didn't think about it until I said it, but now you're like, well, now I can't not breathe on purpose, right? How heavy are your clothes on your shoulders? You weren't thinking about it, but you can feel it, can't you? So where was it? Where'd it go? You ignore it. As simple as that, your brain just goes, that's enough. Okay, I get it. I know where my toes are right now, right? I can feel whether or not my socks are bunched up around the ankle. And eventually you just get over it, right? A rock in your shoe. For like an hour, you're like, oh my gosh, this is like the worst thing ever. Also, if you leave a rock in your shoe for an hour, you're an idiot. But for like an hour, you're like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. By the end of the day, you just don't even like realize that the rock's in there, right? You just get used to stuff. A really bad smell, right? You walk into this room, I just ripped a nice one, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, Parker just ripped like a huge fart, right? Partly it's gonna, just go away because of like air and stuff. But also your brain just gets used to it. You burn some food in the kitchen and you're like, oh, that smells awful, and it's burnt food, and 20 minutes later you don't even think about it, right? Really loud music, you're like, oh, that's driving me insane. 10 minutes later, you're not even thinking about how loud it is, right? Try this the next time you're like driving in the car or just listening to music, right? Put on a song at just whatever volume you're most comfortable with, okay? Just listen to it for a little bit, whatever. Couple songs later, so 6, 7, 8 minutes later, turn the volume up 1 or down 1. And you'll notice, right? You'll go, oh, it just got quieter. Oh, it just got louder, right? Wait a couple more songs and ask yourself, is it still louder or is it still quieter? It's not, right? But it is, because it's the same volume it's been the whole time. But your brain is no longer going, that got louder than it did before, right? You wouldn't be able to handle that many sensations at once. You just couldn't. So your body has to ignore stuff. The one type of adaptation that I find fascinating is eyes. Do you guys see an issue that we might have with adaptation and vision? Maybe you've heard about this in like a psych course. Anybody know what happens? They've done experiments where they can stabilize your eye, and your eye does not move. You go temporarily blind because your brain adapts to what it's seeing. If you're just looking at a white sheet of paper like this, got really loud, and you're just staring at the white sheet of paper and your eyes can't move at all, it just disappears and you stop seeing it. Because just like smell, just like sound, your brain just says, I've been looking at this for too long. It doesn't matter anymore. And it stops paying attention. But do you sit there and do you consciously like move your eyes all the time? Try and just stare at something until it goes away. You can't do it. Okay? Go home and try it with your biology homework. Just stare at it. And don't move at all, right? And just stare right at it. It's not going to disappear. Your eye has the ability to make micro movements. It literally just does the tiniest little wiggles. You can't even see it. If you were to come and look me like right in the eyes right now, you wouldn't be able to tell. It's literally microscopic movements. But it keeps your brain going, this is new, 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 even though it's not. So your eyes are tricking your brain into essentially not giving up, right? So I think that's super cool.
So is that the premise of like optical illusions? Like you stare at something for a certain amount of time and then you look at something else and it looks like it's moving?
It's part of it, yeah. That's one of them. One of them too is if you stare at this dot, that dot up there starts to like fade away, you know what I mean? So part you can kind of force yourself to stare at one thing. You'll never be able to like go black You know what I mean? Because your eyes always make even just the tiniest movements. But yeah, if you like hyper focus on one spot, kind of the surrounding area starts to dim. It's part of that, yeah. So your eyes always just kind of, and so when I shadowed this eye doctor 2 days ago, yesterday, whenever it was, he let me watch under a microscope, right? So I was actually looking at the eye under a microscope, and you can actually see the eye just barely just vibrating the tiniest bit, but you can't see it if you're just looking at someone's face, right? Because it's literally microscopic movements, and it's just how your brain, or how your eyes tell your brain, keep going, keep looking, pay attention, right? So that's adaptation, is essentially just you get the stimulus over and over and over and over and over and over. Eventually your brain goes, okay, we don't care anymore, is the way I think about it, right? Your brain just says, it doesn't matter anymore. Yes, the music's loud. What if I just ignore it? At least I'm not uncomfortable anymore, right?
This is kind of off topic, but I'm just curious of, so when you're born, is this fully intact or is this a developed thing?
Like, do you learn adaptation?
Yeah, because I mean, you're in the womb for 9 months and you don't know anything different than liquid, and then you're out in the world, you have all these different things.
If it is learned, I would guess that it's learned very quickly, because sensory overload will literally debilitate you. That's what people like with PTSD have. They had so many things happen to them all at once. They literally got overloaded and they shut down. So we would basically all be born with PTSD. The other thing is you can hear in the womb. You can see, kind of. It's not great. They're starting to think that you can taste, which I think is a little weird. I doubt you could smell. I don't know. What does underwater smell like? I don't know. And you can feel. That's actually why babies kick, is to be like, all right, I'm still here, like I'm good, right? And so they're just testing their boundaries. So I would guess that you can still adapt to your environment. It probably wouldn't be as often because the stimulus is a lot lower, but yeah, and if you have to learn it, I bet you learn very quick. Otherwise, you wouldn't cope. The world's too dang much. That's why we all come out crying. The world's the worst. Other questions? You guys didn't think biology was cool. And then you start to find out all the weird things your body does just to stay alive. All right, hearing and balance. Why are they on the same slide? Kind of. They
build on each other.
They build on each other. Okay, keep going.
You can't hear, you can't balance yourself.
Same process.
Okay, right.
Well, isn't there like fluid in your ear that you can like feel where you're at?
Okay, everybody's got pieces of the right answer. So put it all together, and essentially your ears are responsible for hearing. Everybody knows that. But also balance, right? You have little cilia in your ears and fluid inside that moves, right? And as we move and we tip, the fluid moves those cilia, and they send a signal to the brain saying, hey, we just tipped this way. Hey, we just tipped that way. Hey, we just tipped this way. Hey, we're upside down, right? Part of the reason if you're underwater, why you can't tell what's going on, if you're like in a cave or something, is you don't have any external stimulus like gravity or vision or anything to say this is up and this is down, right? There's no gravity, well, there's very minimal gravity to move that fluid, right? Space, obviously, is an even better example because there is no gravity. So this is a picture of a statocyst in an invertebrate, right? So like an insect. So we don't have that, we have our ears, okay? But it's the same idea. I can't think of, it's like the most basic thing. What's that disorder where you always feel like you're off balance? Vertigo. So I had a neighbor, and he had vertigo because of, I think, a shotgun blast, something like that. I don't know if he forgot to put in earplugs or whatever it was, but somebody shot off a shotgun like right next to him. Oh, he was a SWAT officer. That's what it was. They don't wear earplugs. They have to be able to hear what's going on. And they had like broken into a house or something, and somebody shot off a shotgun like right next to his head, and it destroyed his eardrum like beyond repair, right? But it also blew out the cilia inside of his ear, and so his whole right side of his body doesn't really have a sense of which way's what, right? So the left side helps, right? That's why he doesn't just like topple flat over. But he says like going down the stairs and stuff is really tricky because he takes a step with his left foot, he's good. He takes a step with his right foot and he's like, I don't know where I am, right? The cilia got destroyed and it doesn't work. So he can't hear out of that ear, but he also can't balance very well on that side. So why don't deaf people have a hard time with balance?
Kind of going back to that adaptation, their body never had it to get used to it in the first place.
Not quite. Does anybody know what conductive deafness is? Or inductive deafness? Either one. So there's two kinds of deafness, and this isn't for our class. There's conductive and inductive. Inductive deafness is the most common kind, and that's when something goes wrong with your inner ear, your middle ear, like your eardrum or your ossicles, those little bones, the stapes, incus, and malleus. They break, they're malformed, your eardrum tears, something like that, right? So your brain doesn't get a very strong signal because the sound goes into your ear and hits your eardrum, but then your ossicles don't send the information along. But ossicles have nothing to do with balance. That's in your inner ear, right, in your cochlea. So they don't have an issue with balance. They have an issue with their ossicles, which are not related. So hearing and balance are related, but they're not the same thing. Do you guys see what I'm saying? So this is why deaf people usually don't have a hard time with balance, unless they have conductive deafness sometimes. If their conductive deafness is because of damage to the cilia, right? So my neighbor, shotgun blast, killed his cilia, right? Not his ossicles. His ossicles are fine. His cilia are damaged. So he can't respond to changes in direction very well. Make sense? So they're related. They are not the same. Anyway, let's talk about what's actually on the screen. Statocyst is the sensory organ, so if you want to think about it as the equivalent of the inner ear for an invertebrate, and then statoliths are these little particles inside that they're just particles, right? And they respond to gravity like every other matter that exists in the universe, right? So you tip this way, and the statoliths kind of tip around inside the statocyst. And those cilia that it's sitting on say, okay, now the statocysts are here. Statoliths. Now the statoliths are here. Now the statoliths are here. You tip it upside down, and the statoliths go all the way to the other end, and they say, okay, now the statoliths are all the way down here, right? So it's the same idea, but they, instead of having fluid running across the cilia, they have little, just particles. I don't even know what they are. I'm sure they're proteins, and they just roll around inside and tell them which way's which. Make sense? Okay, so be familiar with statocysts as the sensory organ, statoliths as the little particles inside, and then how human hearing and balance are related.
So statocyst isn't the actual organism?
It's the organ inside of.
It's found in
Just invertebrates, as far as I'm aware, yeah. So like insects and... do they have one statocyst? Is that what you're saying? I don't know how many they would have, because I actually don't even know how big they are. They're not that big, I'd say 64 cells or so. So I don't know. Bigger organisms maybe have more. You would technically only need one, but obviously more is a better backup. But yeah, so this is invertebrates. Statocyst is the sensory organ inside of the invertebrate.
So is this whole thing on the left, this is all statocyst?
Yeah, except for the nerve fibers at the bottom. So that whole circle, oval, I guess, is a statocyst. I guess I could not point at it from across the room. This is a statocyst. These are the statoliths, and these are the cilia, the ciliated receptor cells. Okay? All right, we're almost out of time. Sound. If you've ever taken any kind of physics, you already kind of know what's going on. But it's energy in the form of sound waves, right? All sensations essentially boil down to a type of energy. Hearing is interpreting sound energy, right? Sound waves compress and rarefy air, right? and we detect the compressions and rarefactions as pitch and loudness. So frequency, meaning how often a rarefaction and compression occurs, tells you the pitch, right? So somebody with a lower voice has a lower frequency, right? A lower pitch to their voice. They compress and rarefy air slower. Whereas loudness has to do with the intensity of the sound wave. So if I'm talking a little bit quiet, if I like turned the microphone off, I wouldn't have very intense sound waves. Turn the microphone on and I start yelling into it, right? Then the peaks get higher. You get higher intensity, you get louder, right? So your average conversation is 60 decibels. Above 80, you'll damage your hearing. So if you were standing next to a jet engine when it took off, it'd be over 120 decibels and it would hurt your ears, right? Or if you're at a concert, right? This is why musicians wear those ear things, right? Because they do it every day. They would go deaf by like 30, right? So they have to wear some ear protection. Okay, we're out of time. This is the last slide, but since we still have to talk about the inner ear more, we'll just talk about this on Monday in my super session. And Hillary may be better at managing time and better at not getting distracted, and she may go over it tomorrow. So, well, she probably will. She has a super session. So, that is all for today. Whoever's got the role, if you could please bring it up. Per the usual, if you have questions, you can email me, or Hillary, or Dr. Bobek. Come up and talk to me. Do whatever you want.